how do we exchange such knowledge and technology from one another? So these are key things to understand in terms of Africa's development needs and values, how we can shape the global sustainability norms. Because it is when we first of all look inwards and understand our priorities as Africans in space, sometimes going to the moon or developing an astronaut, having an astronaut within the next 20 years may not be what we should focus on. We should look inwards and look at really, for example, how do we leverage the spin-offs from space to develop really things on agriculture, for example. So looking inwards, prioritizing our needs, looking out for different regions in Africa, what do different regions have that others do not have, and coming together to build that African space platform in a way that it can be solidified to stand as a voice in the global space community, such that we can always come on the negotiation table and talk about what we think should be happening in space regarding space sustainability. I will stop there for now. Thanks.
All right. That is good. Maybe in that case, we should also include that Africans should also be able to push for multilateral cooperation in and South Africa. I mean South-South partnership that offer a model for collaboration sustainability. I think maybe that one can also help. So let's go to the next questions. This times it goes to Dr. Bianca, and we ask what needs to build a local capacity for researchers or for research and policy in Africa. Can you hear me?
Yes. To answer your question, so what's needed to build local capacity for research and policy? There's quite a few different aspects that that can be looked at. So in terms of education and training, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the funding and support that's needed, and also policy frameworks. So, looking at graduate programs in space science and engineering. So I'm an aerospace engineer, and we do a lot of this kind of training, and New Zealand's also starting to build its capacity in terms of training programs across the different universities, investment in STEM subjects at the school level. And in terms of the funding and support, so we're talking about commercial companies, access to grants, access to venture capital, and regional funding mechanisms to support that research and development and innovative startups, and trying to build that ecosystem of funding and support. And in terms of infrastructure, looking at building more ground stations, more data centers, and also manufacturing capabilities for some of the technologies that were talked about earlier by some of the panelists. And in terms of policy frameworks, so, looking at national space laws that really emphasize sustainability, space orbital debris mitigation, and also safe and responsible operations. Specifically in terms of sustainability, I would say, thinking about my experience here in New Zealand's space sector, which is, where I'm based, and focusing on sustainability, really trying to develop sustainability as a skill set that can then be incorporated into the aerospace industry. Because I think one of the other attendees talked about technocrats not really seeing the bigger picture. And unfortunately, that's the case with sustainability as well. So sustainability professionals that can actually do, life cycle assessments, think about green propulsion, greenhouse gas monitoring, supply chain monitoring, all of these skills can be brought into the emerging space industry. And if that's done from the very beginning, from the very foundation of it, that can really lead to much better outcomes rather than trying to introduce these concepts later on and trying to change things in retrospect, because it really takes a lot to change people's mindsets.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is a good contribution. The last question goes to Dr. Isabella, sorry. We are asking about what partnership in terms of academic, government, and or commercial are essential in this context.
So you said about the partnerships, which partnerships are essential, right?
Yes.
So there are more and more international and global forums on different kinds and different aspects of space. And I think when we talk about collaboration, yes, collaboration is always important, but the first and most important thing is to decide what do you want to collaborate on, right? Because there's so many different aspects of the space economy and future. And as previous people said, you can be totally passionate about making Mars settlements or exploring deep space, or like basically anything you can imagine. And there's going to be a community in space where you can collaborate with researchers or companies or anything like that. But so the first thing before collaborating is to have an internal decision. What do you want to achieve, right? Like what should be the ecosystem or the economy you're building? Like what's the vision? And when the vision is clear, it's going to be very easy to find the collaboration partners, because then you're aligned on the same idea, on the same vision you're working towards too. And then collaboration gets much easier because you're working on the same thing. And like, I think I can only highlight here as well also what the previous speaker said with looking inwards. And because the end goal is creating value, like no matter what you're collaborating on, no matter what you're funding, you want to create some kind of value at some point for somebody. And that may be more abstract or more long-term or more risky the further you go away, partially, right? We don't know if we will live on Mars and who will, and so on. There's like many, many uncertainties. But what everybody wants at some point is a functioning economy, right? A functioning space economy that actually creates value. So I think one thing to start collaboration immediately on, like across Africa or even internationally, is to find these real use cases where space application create real value for the people, for the planet, maybe using Earth observation data for improving disaster response, right? Or for agriculture, or for environmental protection, like those kind of things. Defining what you want to create, what kind of value you're aiming for, is crucial to find the right partners to then achieve that. And then also to find the right people to have this knowledge transfers and to have the skill set, right? Because like there's many things that need to come together, not just sending a satellite up, of course, but also to be able to analyze the data, to get real information that are useful for people out of the data. Yeah, and then to create collaborations between research institutions across the world. So I've been at conferences where we had like representatives from everywhere, right? From China, from the US, from Russia, also from South Africa, we had some people there. And of course, space is still sensitive because of security and military purposes. That's still present, but a vast, very vast area of space, also very open to collaborate internationally, especially if it's about creating real value for people here on Earth. Because no matter how much you invest right now in space, at some point you want to have like a value that comes back from that investment.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think maybe because of time, so that is the end of the question session for our panelists. But for the closure reflection, so we thank you, ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this remarkable dialogue, and we take a moment maybe to be able to reconcile what we have just discussed.
So we're not quite finished yet. We have some questions and we have some things we'd like to talk about. So we're talking about space sustainability, and I think certainly I have a question for the panelists who may know something about this question of the space debris, for example. I think one of you mentioned that there is some capability in one of the, I think it's Nigeria, to do space debris. But I know there's a conversation happening now about the new rules and regulations that will apply. And anybody can answer this question. What are your thoughts about the preparation needed for those African countries which are just now beginning to put vehicles in space, are just not becoming space actors, right? Where they have something up in space. How can we prepare them? What might be some ways and some paths we can use to fast track preparing them to have this conversation as the rules begin to change about what can go up and what must come down and how the whole space debris question is answered? Because that is going to be a very fast moving conversation. Any ideas about how we might begin to have this conversation before, again, Africa is behind and is not designing its research, its current investments to be ready for those new rules which are forthcoming? So that's a futures question.
Sure, I'll share briefly also. I think that the new standards are, like you said, being able to come down within a couple years. And I think that while that's important to make sure that we just don't have endless space junk, it also is not as sustainable as it could be. I'm a part of the AIAA Space Sustainability Task Force led by Dr. Morbaja, and he talks about the space circular economy. And I think that thinking about next generation technologies of being able to use space debris as a resource, I think is really exciting. We've gone through all this trouble to get these really high value electronics into orbit. How can we repurpose them into making ourselves a future spacefaring civilization? So I would love for us to imagine what this next generation of sustainability around addressing the debris issue. But I'd love to hear the other panelists' ideas around that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody else. Do you have any ideas? Because it's no point in asking governments to invest in money to do old stuff, right? Like you said, we're going to focus and come up with one or two things that, as Dr. Aladi said, then we need to be focusing on future. There's something I call the development effectiveness gap, right? So we have to leapfrog. We can't, Africa should not be doing space in the same, first we do this, second we do this, third we do this, as what happened 20 years ago. We're already 40 years behind. So what needs to happen is that we need to be thinking about how do we say, here is where space is going to be in 10 years. Based on the budget we have, here are some top 5 things we could do. So I'd love to hear from each of you. What are maybe top 3 to 5 things? Each person comes up with one, we have some direction as to where do we take things. So for example, a university like the African University of Science and Technology, which has embedded their space program with NASDA here in Nigeria, could be like a hub center to project information out to all the other countries in West Africa, for example.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. I would like to add my voice to that. I teach sustainable business models in the university, and I believe that a focus on some forms of sustainable business models within the space sector can help in regards to the space debris challenge. For example, how do we do things like sustainable product design? How do we begin to design certain, spacecrafts that will be made in such a way that already it has a sustainable product design, such that the level of debris that is going to produce at the end of the day will not be as much as it is presently? How do we also do things like product recycling? How do we do things like remanufacturing? How do we certain aspects of the components that goes into space, how can they be remanufactured? How do we do things like reusing? So these kind of things are things to be considered, such that when we are developing a program for scientists and engineers to work on, they should also integrate these business models, because the space sector is competitive, and we have to try as much as possible balance, to balance, profit with sustainability, and to make sure that we don't just are interested in what we get as spin-offs from space, but how do we produce what we launch into space such that it is launched in a more sustainable manner? So these different business models should be integrated into things like remanufacturing, sustainable product design. That is, before you design a product in the first place, how sustainable will it be when it goes into space? So these are key things I think should be integrated. Thanks.
Right, so I'm going to ask you for a follow-up question to think about, why I asked Dr. Priyanka, who is an engineer, about the same sustainability question. But your follow-up question is going to be, so how, given that most business schools in Africa are not even talking about space, where do we begin? But let me go to Dr. Priyanka and say, you're an engineer, you're a mechanical engineer, so you probably know a lot of people in the material science, etc. department. The question is, we want to move the sustainability agenda. First of all, I don't know that many schools anywhere in the world are teaching. Many engineering schools are even teaching sustainability. So what is your experience in New Zealand in terms of the engineering fraternity now, beginning that shift in mindset, and how might we advance that conversation in the engineering schools in Africa that are now training the generation of people who are doing space applications and space, aerospace engineering and mechanical engineering and material science? What has been your experience in New Zealand, which is, I think New Zealand is a bit ahead of the curve, right? So what has been your experience?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Part of it has actually come from the students themselves. I think the generation that's going through university now is so much more aware of climate change and sustainability than even I was when I was an undergrad student. So a lot of the discourse and the vocabulary is actually coming from them. Like, they want to learn about this stuff at university. The other aspect is the University of Auckland has encouraged more interdisciplinary learning around space. So we have a CubeSat building program that's available to students from every faculty in the university. So there's engineers who are working with art students, philosophy students, that bring in these different mindsets and these perspectives. And that's where some of that sustainable thinking and those principles are coming in to the engineering schools. And the other aspect I would say is coming from the indigenous culture. So there is a huge emphasis on sustainability and thinking in terms of a circular economy, in a way, in the indigenous Maori culture in New Zealand. And so a lot of those values are taught in schools already. But they really come through when we are bringing in people from different faculties, different cultures to work on a space project. And I would also like to emphasize the close connection between, because going back to your earlier question, you were asking about how to stay on top of ever-changing space regulations. The close relationship between the New Zealand Space Agency and the local space companies has actually been really important to take some of that load off of startups and new space companies to look after this these changing regulations and do some of that paperwork on their behalf. So the relationship between Rocket Lab, for example, and the New Zealand Space Agency has been very, very close since the beginning, and that has really helped Rocket Lab stay on top of the changing regulations. So this is where national space agencies have a huge role to play in terms of helping their own companies.
Yeah, before I go on to my next question, let me get one of the young people who are in the room to ask your question.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this session. I actually have two questions. One is to Dr. Isabel, and then the second one is to Dr. Taslim Alade. So my first question, Dr. Isabel, when you were responding to the first question, you talked about how space have been helpful in mitigating the problems of agriculture, health, and you mentioned specifically human rights. And as somebody who is law inclined, I would like to ask, how can space technologies or ideas help to mitigate the problems of human rights in Africa? That's my question. Then my second question, Dr. Alade, you spoke about the idea that Africa may not need to actually send astronauts to the space for now, that we should be focusing on how to use space technologies or space ideas to rather help the African social problems. But the first speaker, the speakers from the first panel before now, one of the speakers spoke about Africans' need to have their own Apollo program. So I want this is more like a contribution and also a question. I think we need to, as Africans, we need to put ourselves out there in the spotlight, like sending astronauts or even our own machine to space out there. Because in doing this, our leaders, we see that we are actually doing something out there. Dr. Claire spoke about talking how to bring leaders to the table, how to bring our African leaders to the table on how to have conversation to move the space sector in Africa to a different new level. So I feel like if we put our astronauts out there, it will help our leaders come to the realization that Africa is doing something, and then it will bring them back to their tables, and they'll start deliberating, how do we in fact like innovate? How do we in fact help to bring the conversation to the table more? So that's like a question. How do we, the question now for Dr. Taslim is, I'm just trying to bring background and concepts to this. How do we, if we are not supposed to be focused on sending our people to space, how would our leaders or how would the African society get to know or understand that we are doing something? So thank you very much.
I think that question also harkens to the previous speaker who talked about the inferiority complex that needs to be overcome. And yesterday, you weren't on the call yesterday, but one company talked about they went after a bid and the government preferred to work with a Chinese company. They did not give it to the local company because they had no confidence that the company could actually do it. So if we don't have a level of confidence, then the question is, how are we going to do it? So I think, Isabel, you would go first.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the question. I think it's very important to see the real world applications of for space, especially for purposes like human rights and so on, right? So there's different ways space can serve human rights on Earth, right? So there's, for instance, and that's perhaps one of the most important things already, the Earth observation data, right? Like having imagery from satellites from space that can share and validate important information if there's something going on in terms of detention camps, in terms of war crimes, genocide, like anything that is threatening human rights. You can get verified, clear, proven data by Earth observation satellites. That can be already essential when you're talking about as a lawyer, right? Like for courts and so on. Like if you have evidence that things are happening, it's going to be much easier. And then, of course, there's also like more abstract things like having satellite-based internet in more remote areas can also help people to access information, to access communication via like social media or just contacting anyone outside their immediate social environment, right? So having access to internet information can be also like one of the parts that can help human rights in some cases. Then, of course, you can also use it for emergency response. That goes back for Earth observation data, right? Like if you see, okay, maybe there's a flood, or like maybe there's a drought, or like you can see the outcomes, or like what's happening in any given area, you can better prepare and send the right resources that are needed in the right location, because you have a superior perspective from space. So those kind of applications can be incredibly valuable for saving lives by just having the information that you would normally maybe not have, just because you have the perspective from above. And then there's like two little things I want to add to the previous question from the sustainability parts. There's two things you can definitely do, and I would highly encourage to get in touch with these people. The one thing is there's a European Space Agency Zero Debris Charter. It's a community across agencies, countries, companies. I think about 200 different space actors are part of that community about space sustainability. I'm part of that community myself. And this ESA Zero Debris Charter provides lots of education, information sharing, best practices. We're publishing the charter, technical recommendations, and a whole lot of information on zero debris and space sustainability. If there's anyone interested in getting in touch or joining this community, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'm happy to connect people there. They are also, especially the ESA Clean Space team, is also working on sustainable or zero debris CubeSats, like light satellites that are demisable. That they means that they don't stay in space, but they demise when they re-enter in the atmosphere. Like they are working basically full time on zero debris and sustainability, and they're always very happy to share information and to have people joining their efforts. So if anyone is interested in connecting with the ESA Clean Space team or the ESA Zero Debris Charter, I'm very happy to introduce you.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat before Dr. Alade answers. Specify for space debris vehicles whether recyclable or deorbited. I'm not sure who that is for, but whoever is a space debris person, specify for space debris vehicles whether recyclable or deorbited. So if you want to type the answer, go ahead. Dr. Alade, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I really much like the question from the person who posed it. It is not that Africa should not go to space as astronauts, no. But however, that should be a long-term plan. These are my reasons. I'll structure it into 3 layers. The first, let us revisit the value of education. What is the value of education? So we have things like the value of education is for qualification. You go to school, you get qualified, you get a certificate, you can do something. Socialization, how the community structures education such that when you go to it, you belong to a certain system within the society. And the last one, subjectification, which means what do you learn such that you can have the autonomy to do things independently, to be able to have your own independent critical thinking method. This is based on Biesta's theory of education. So in our education system, we do not give this autonomy. So there is a challenge on this subjectification aspect. That is why our blue-collar jobs are being stigmatized. That is why our technical schools have disappeared. So everyone wants to go to the university. No one wants to go to the technical university. And then the aspect of the engineering skills diminishes over time. Yes, we want to send an astronaut to space, but we need to do it bottom up, not top bottom. In other words, where do we start? We start by making sure that the kind of education we give in schools gives ownership, gives agency to students to be able to make something, make the parts of the shuttle that goes to space, for example. How do we make this part? You send an astronaut to space. How do you sustain that? So it's about what do we do? So my PhD research was about innovation adaptation in the urban light rail transport, looking at Africa and China. Now, the case of Addis Ababa, they had an absorptive capacity and technology transfer structure. In 6 months, Ethiopians were the ones driving the light rail. 2 years, operational maintenance transferred. 4 years, operational maintenance completely transferred. 5 years, everything transferred except the rolling stock, which they cannot produce. That is top-bottom approach, such that later, the long-term plan will be to produce the rolling stock. So the long-term plan for Africa will be, how do we manufacture this materials that goes into space, and how do we send astronauts to space? But for now, we need to go back to our education system, which we have stigmatized the technical universities, technical colleges. That is where we should start from. At the same time, we should learn to integrate subjectification as a value of education. How do you give students autonomy? How do you give students agency to manufacture things, to do things on their own? This is the way to go. So it is very key that we go back to revisit the blue-collar jobs. These are very important. They have practically almost disappeared in Africa. Then we should remember that when we are collaborating with any country in terms of technology or knowledge transfer about space, we must be intentional to have our own absorptive capacity structure. How do we receive the science, the knowledge and technology from these other parts of the world? We shouldn't just embrace technology and knowledge transfer, which we cannot replicate within a short term. Is a waste of time and money. So we should send astronauts to space, but it should be a long-term plan. For now, we need to go back to the grassroots, back to the drawing board, and do the needful and build up. China did not become a frontier in space today. They started many years ago. They sent their people all over the world to keep learning, have the autonomy, be able to do things yourself, and then they are where they are today. We should follow similar paths. Thanks.
Thank you. Our other speakers are here, but I want to give the other two panelists a chance to say something on what their passion is around this issue, because you chose to, you're invited, but you chose to be here because there's something you want to say that you might not yet have said, and we'd love to hear that. So in closing, perhaps Ari and Dr. Priyanka, do you have anything to add? I know, Ari, for sure you're very involved in the UN system. You're based in Hawaii. We saw that the US has just decided to pull out again from UNESCO. How does civil society in United States, who believe in a global America, compete against the other side of America that does not believe in a global America, whatever that means? So I'd love to hear your perspective on how do we who live in America have this conversation and maintain our global partnerships.
Absolutely. And I think that I would love to make the case also for human spaceflight. I think that these are really important points around going from the grassroots to the bottom up on creating this comprehensive space economy and infrastructure really built around educating the next generation and filling in all the gaps. And I think that having representation, having the human experience in space is incredibly valuable. And an organization I'm a part of, Space for Humanity, has provided scholarships for people to go to space. We've sent 7 people to space, including the first woman from the continent of Africa, the first woman born in Mexico, Ed Dwight, the first Black astronaut candidate. I think that not only as representation, but the ability to have this overview effect of seeing the world as one system and coming back down and making that impact in their community helps with everything else as well. And through that, we've created this Advancing Humanity in Space Congressional Caucus that is bipartisan around supporting these issues that we're talking about. I think the next closest thing to going to space and having that overview effect experience is around these community gathering programs. And I'm also part of a program around seeing total solar eclipses. And so we had 40,000 people in Texas, including astronauts, but also musicians and artists and cultural leaders. We're doing the same thing in Iceland. It will be happening in Egypt in 2027 and Australia. And I think that these serve as analog research programs to look at what the future of culture can be in space and how we bring the best of us with us to the cosmos. As AI and technology takes over a lot of the working jobs, it allows us to be and employ the creative jobs. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I think that Africa can take a leadership role there. So would love to talk more about all those, and thank you all so much for having us.
Thank you. Dr. Priyanka?
It's a tough act to follow. I think all the panelists have made some really, really good points. I just want to end, I guess, on this note of, as emerging space actors, we can actually do things differently. We don't have to follow the same path that all of these historical or traditional space actors have followed. And if we try and do things differently, think about sustainability as a goal or a priority from the very beginning, what I think we can actually achieve something different, something that's better, because the world has changed since the US first, sent somebody to the moon, or Russia first sent somebody into space. The generations now, they worry about the future, they worry about the climate, and we're seeing effects of climate change in every aspect, every sphere of society. So if we want to do something different, and achieve something different, how can we incorporate sustainability into every aspect of an emerging space sector? Because I think at the end of the day, we see space as like this blank slate, but it's really a mirror to how we do things here on Earth. And so that's kind of the main message of all of the work that I do and all of the research that I'm doing is how can we do something differently so we don't end up repeating the same patterns, the same mistakes that we have been making here on Earth.
Thank you so much. Dr. Essett, closing remarks as moderator. If you could unmute, sir. Oh, he's frozen. All right, maybe his thing is frozen. All right, so folks, thank you so much. I think there's a very rich discussion, a very important discussion. I believe in the leapfrogging approach.
So
is okay. Go ahead, Dr. Essett. You're frozen for a while. Your closing remarks, sir. Dr. Essett?
Yeah, my closing remarks?
Yes.
Yeah, we thank you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, for participating on this moment, to be able to recognize the gravity of the visions we have been able to explore, both in our continent and for the humanity. And African is not a mere joining the conversation in space sustainability, but what we do is to be able to reshape and maybe form innovative satellite program that will give us a cutting-edge research hub as a continent to be able to prove that reasonable development is not a luxury, but a very necessity to be able to share the journey of this to start. So what set Africa apart as a continent is an inclusions in terms of ethical progress and indigenous ingenuity. So we are also building a framework on this, what we have done today, so that we can be able to have a space technology that would not just maybe a mere save a light mission, but also to contribute directly, which is very important to us to solve ground level challenges that we have in terms of climate monitoring, education, agriculture.
We must wrap up. Our other
disaster.
speakers are here.
Yeah, so we thank you so much for attentions and being here to be able to take part in this. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Great conversation.